Greetings, everyone. Hello, and welcome to Chilliteracy. Happy Wednesday, and thank you very much, everybody, for all the lightning strikes we're going to be getting through now. Thank you very much, Sam, for raiding over from The Longest John's Gaming. I hope you did not tilt. I hope you defeated the boss. I don't know. I wasn't watching the stream. I apologise. Yes, hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Squirrel, for resubscribing. Thank you very much... Oh, me for resubscribing. Thanks, me. Thank you very much, Smallcog, for resubscribing. Thank you very much, Arian, for resubscribing. My goodness me. Everybody with the resubscriptions. Yeah. Hi, everyone. How are we all doing? I hope we are well. Much victory was had and no tilt, very successful skonging. Marvellous, I'm very glad to hear it. Next stream will be Spooky Month. That is true, yeah, it's going to be October before we know it. I mean, technically it's already Spooky Month, come on now. I am already reading the spooky stories, so I'm counting it. Haven't put the spooky overlay on yet, but that is only a matter of time. But hello, how are we all doing? Excuse me, my voice is a bit... It is always Spooky Month, yeah. As soon as August ends, it's spooky time. Spooky time, there we go. That's one word. But yes, we are continuing with some more spooky tales from The Haunted Trail, classic tales of the rambling weird. The first one I kind of love. I mean, I love both of them. They're both excellent stories. First one is a bit shorter. We'll do that in the first half, and then the second one we'll do in the second half. Spooky Month is all months. Yeah. I think also just like, yeah, why the ghost stories and spooky stories are just great. You completely forgotten what day it was, so when the Discord pop-up came up, you had no idea if it was Wednesday or Saturday. And that is why I say Happy Wednesday at the beginning of my streams, because otherwise people can get a little bit lost. Spooky Pride, Spooky Christmas, exactly. I mean, Christmas is traditionally the time for gathering around the fire on a Christmas Eve and telling spooky tales. That is a traditional Victorian ? I think thing. A traditional tradition, yes. Andy, you can't stick around today. Gotta go see some shanty band tonight. That sounds like a silly thing to do. I hope that is a lot of fun. Enjoy. Yeah, I hope they're doing well. But this is decidedly less high energy. You'd have figured it out just from it being me streaming. You make a good point, Perola. You make an excellent point. It's almost like we do that for reasons of knowing which day we're on. We'll get there. But yes, it has been Thursday at least once. That is true, actually. That is true. But yeah, do we have any tales to tell, any interesting things? I will not be streaming next Wednesday, unfortunately, for I am not in the country. How rude of me. I'm not entirely sure what country I'm in next Wednesday, whether it's Germany or the Netherlands, one of the two, or possibly between the two at that point. I don't know. But yes, unfortunately you will not have a stream from me next week, but you should have one from Sam this Saturday and next Saturday. But yeah, do we have any book related news? We encountered a marvelous human being. Secondhand bookshops are just like great. Well, I mean, obviously secondhand bookshops are great places. I mean, that's just a fact. But like the number of interesting people Sam and I have encountered in secondhand bookshops is larger than one. And we encountered this chap in an excellent secondhand bookshop that we frequent the other day, who I can't really remember how we started talking to him or he started talking to us, but he said he was starting conversation, and it transpired that he had 4,000 books. Now, he's obviously counted them. And he said, oh, I'm a bit of a completionist. And we were just like, yes. And he is trying to get through all of the Maigret books. Can't remember the author of the Maigret books. For whole library is amazing. And he's on like the 72nd one or something, I don't know. But he said the whole point, like his whole thing is like he never buys a book first hand. He always has to source it second hand, which is like the thrill of the chase for him. It was just like, oh, this is great. I said that I was trying to get through Discworld, reading through in order, and he was like, oh yes, did that. He said, but I didn't read the last one. He said, I don't want to read the last one, but I do want to read the last one. He said, because I always want to have a Terry Pratchett book that I haven't read, or yet to read, which I think is just a lovely thing. I was like, oh, that's great. So yeah, and he was saying how like his daughter wanted to borrow a copy of Pride and Prejudice the other day, and he's like, oh, there should be a hardback on the shelf over there. Grab that. We are talking about Bookshop Guy. I was like, oh yeah, just grab that hardback off the shelf. And so she did, and she opened it, and she was like, Dad, do you know what year this is from? And he was like, no. And it was like from like 1880 or something, or it was like basically very soon after it had actually been published. And it still had like the original illustrations in it, and like with tissue paper, and he was just like, oh yeah, oh okay, put that back. You can have this paperback version instead. And turns out like his, again, like it's just one of these people who's just like, you have so many cool stories. We could like listen to you talk all day, and apparently like his grandmother would have been like 18 around the time it was published, and her dad was like a wealthy mill owner at the time and sort of got her that as like an 18th birthday present or something, before he lost the family fortune in a patent dispute or something like that. We're just sitting there just going, this is incredible. Can you write down your story, please? Hello, Diana, welcome in. Who needs books when you have stories about books? Yeah, then you write the stories about books in books, and then you have books of stories about books. Yes. So yeah, and I think he said his daughter looked up that particular edition, and it was like £2,000 or something. It was like, oh my god. So he's like, yes, I've probably got some more of those in my collection somewhere. I was like, yeah, with 4,000 books, I imagine you do. So yeah, I kind of want to go back and see if we can find him again. But he said there's also a good secondhand bookshop that we have yet to discover what exactly it is, where it is, what's it called. He said there's another very good secondhand bookshop in Bristol, and we're like, ooh, tell us more. And he's like, oh, I can't remember the name of it. He said, but it's like a giant like barn of a building filled with books, and I think if Sam and I had like the ability for our eyes to become hearts, they would have been then. It's like, don't threaten us with a good time, please. A book barn, a barn of books. I mean, yes, that sounds like the ideal house, frankly. So yeah. That was our excellent encounter with Book Guy, or Bookshop Guy. Don't think he actually gave us his name. And a fire hazard, yes, that's true. But yeah, secondhand bookshops, they're great places, incredible places. And Sam bought something, I can't remember what, a book. I didn't, because I have been there more recently and bought other things. So it's a very dangerous place. Book NPC, yes. Absolutely. But with some just excellent stories. Oh, Nostromo by Joseph Conrad. That's the one. The book NPC. Indeed. But yeah, secondhand bookshops are the best places. Just so good. And this one is particularly lovely, and because it's just, you walk in and the door sticks, for one thing, when it's wet. And you walk in and there's not just bookshelves, there are piles of books. It's a bit like Black Books, actually, except the people who run it are lovely, and they're two old ladies, and they're just delightful people. And they do actually want to sell you books, unlike Bernard Black. But there are just piles and piles of books everywhere. It is a trip hazard, frankly, but it's great. It's a wonderful place. So yeah, that's my little essay on how much I love secondhand bookshops and the people that you find in them. And the fact that just, I don't know, maybe it's something about, books and people in secondhand bookshops obviously actually just like trying to find something cool. They just want to talk about stuff. It's just like, people are eminently approachable in secondhand bookshops, and so everybody approaches each other and talks about books. It's great. Love it. You counter this with the specialist crime bookshop down a creaky alley in central Cambridge. Bodies in the bookshop. Oh, wow. Okay. That also sounds incredible. That does sound very good. There is also a bookshop in Winchester, which is also down an alley, that frankly I only discovered I knew about it, I just never had gone in, like a year or so ago. That is very much, I don't know, the owner of that bookshop doesn't feel like he wants to sell you books. It's just like, oh, you just want me to go, don't you? This is your little sort of dragon's hoard of books. You don't want people to take any books away from it. Okay. But yeah, that does sound like an incredible place. Nice. But yeah, now we've done talking about bookshops. I have a couple of spooky stories for you tonight. Hopefully the text that I have found works. These are a little bit difficult to find the texts of, some of them. What type of Dracula does this one have? A marshy one. There you go. Also, hi Shyhawk. Hope you're well. Welcome in. Just realised that this first sentence is probably going to make the immature of us snort. But yeah, we're gonna read some spooky stories. Swamp Dracula, basically. Sexy, dusty, big cape. I mean, that's just Dracula, isn't it? But yeah, when I've got my brain back in gear, we are going to The Count from the Black Lagoon. Exactly. Perfect. This one is set in Cornwall. No, I'm not going to do Cornish accents. I don't think. But yes, if we are all sitting comfortably, then we shall begin our little venture into spooky stories tonight with Crowdy Marsh by Sabine Baring-Gould. I believe that one of the most desolate spots in the West is the moor about Brown Willie, and one of the most unpleasant experiences I have encountered is being lost at the fall of night on that moor late in the autumn, and when the days are short and the darkness settles down as a black pall over moor and fen, when even the tors no longer reflect the dying light, and are seen only as black profiles against a sky in which is scarce a ray or only a ghastly glare in the west. I was out one day at the end of October with my friend Richards, shooting on the Bodmin moors, or to be more exact, we went out with the purpose of shooting blackcock, but saw not one. The fact that we had been unsuccessful tended to make us prolong our tramp, always hoping that we might see one, and always disappointed. At last I said, "Come, Richards, we must turn back. The sun has set and I don't want to lose my way about Brown Willie and run the risk of stumbling into Crowdy Marsh." Brown Willie, the highest of the Cornish tors, is not of great height, only 1,375 feet, but with its 5-horned head it proves a bold and conspicuous object, and in ancient times it was a beacon. 3 immense cairns are piled up on the summit, on which once blazed fires to warn the country round when foreign sails appeared on the sea and there was thought to be risk of invasion. We were bound for Camelford, where there is a comfortable hotel, and where we were aware that a good supper was awaiting us. But then, how to get there? Now, the moor about Brown Willie and his sister Rough Tor is peculiarly nasty with bogs, and these bogs are not to be trifled with. On the west of Rough Tor is Stannon Marsh, and below the Tor it possesses a little odious morass of its own, Rough Tor Marsh, in which the Delank River rises. Then, under Butterne Hill, is another, much bigger, that festers in its own muck, feeding no stream at all. Due north of Rough Tor, on Davidstow Moor, is a tract of comparatively dry land, lying between the swamp just mentioned and the redoubted Crowdy Marsh. But this measures only 2/3 of a mile in breadth, and Crowdy Marsh throws out a wet and oozy arm into this dry moorland to grip and draw under an incautious wanderer. Now, it is no joke finding one's way by daylight from Brown Willie across this bridle path between morasses into the Camelford road, and I did not much relish the prospect of venturing on it with night falling. So now I urged Richards to step out, as we had 7 miles to walk if we went the way indicated. But there was another way over Lower Moor between Stannon Marsh and Crowdy that was much shorter, but I was not well acquainted with that portion of the moor, and did not like to venture on it in the dark. It was a mistake, as a direct line ran from the monument on Polden Down to Camelford. However, ill luck attended us all that day, and I chose to push on over Davidstow Moor, where I knew I should strike the high road in 2.5 miles, whereas by the other way I would have no main road at all, and I thought I might get lost among lanes when leaving the open moor. We paced on for some time cheerily, and a certain failing amount of light enabled me to see that we were skirting Rough Tor, and then I said to my companion, "Now we must look alive and mind our steps. We have Scylla on one side and Charybdis on the other, and I do not think there is much choice in rotten apples. I would as soon be engulfed in one as in the other. Look alive, man! By Jove, I am in water!" And so I was. I floundered forward and went into my middle. Then I threw my gun down, cast myself across it, and drew my legs with a tremendous effort out of the slime that had sucked at me, and had indeed by suction torn off one of my gaiters. I called out to Richards to keep away from me and aim for the lightest spot in the sky. As for me, I would find my way out as best I could. The only possible way of getting out of these bogs is to aim for some point and work steadily forward towards it, for otherwise one shifts from one tussock of grass or mass of grey moss to another, and loses all knowledge of direction, and very often one travels about in a circle. But just now it was not easy to take a direction. To the north there was nothing conspicuous at which one could aim, and yet to the north we had to go. How I cursed my folly in taking this course instead of that from the monument. Lanes, bad though they might be and bewildering, could not swallow one up as would these bogs if they got hold of you. Moreover, the cold of the slimy water was intense and numbed the legs and feet. At last, creeping forward on my breast with the gun athwart me, I reached a hump of drier ground, and seated myself on it to gather breath before proceeding farther, worming my way through the mire. I called to Richards to go forward. I would follow. But I received no answer. I called again and again, but met with no response. There was still a long tract of morass, very similar in nature to that through part of which I had struggled, and I was fain to get through it in the same manner as before, writhing along like a lizard. Then, my strength gave way. The strain on my muscles had been too great, and I turned dizzy. What had become of Richards I did not know. I greatly feared that he had been swallowed up. Exhausted, panting, my brow beaded with sweat, yet at the same time conscious of extreme cold from immersion, I tried to gather my senses together. I was still not out of the morass. I did not know in which direction to worm my way. The stench in my nostrils of the decomposing matter sickened me. As I thus lay prostrate, I heard the peal of a horn. A steely light still lingered in the southwest, not enough to enable me to distinguish forms at a distance. Moreover, I could not turn my head where I lay and look in the direction whence came the sound. Then I heard the deep-mouthed baying of hounds and another peal of the horn, nearer than before. Next moment, to my ineffable surprise, I saw the dark form of a horseman in full gallop pass near me over the surface of the morass, followed by a pack. As one of the hounds swept by me, touching me, by a sudden impulse I let go my gun and threw my arms about the body of the dog. In an instant I was whirled from the tussock of grass on which I lay and carried forward, swift as the wind, ploughing through water, coarse grass, and moss blinding me, but I held fast desperately, and in a few moments felt that I was on firm ground, whereupon I relaxed my hold and rolled over on one side. Then I saw before me a rude stone house, thatched doubtless with rushes and heather, before which the huntsman had drawn up, and the hounds were barking about the door. There was either no window to the cottage, or that which existed had been so well closed by shutters as to allow no ray of light to appear. A streak, however, issued from below the door. The horn rang out again. Then the door was thrown open, and in the doorway, against the red light from a peat fire within, appeared the forms of 3 women. Their faces I could not see, nor was there light sufficient coming from the house to enable me to distinguish the features of the horseman. But I could make out that he had saddlebags cast over the back of the steed. These, without a word of explanation or salutation, he lifted and cast at the women, who caught them and once retired within. I could see a table, and onto this the women poured the contents of the bags that glittered, but whether from the reflection of the fire or from phosphoric light in themselves, I had no means of judging. Without a word, one woman came forth and threw the empty bags to the huntsman, who caught them dexterously, replaced them over his saddle, sounded another blast, and instantly he, followed by the pack, was off careering over the moor, and the last I saw of him and the hounds was profiled against the dying light in the sky on the shoulder of a tor. The women had shut the door. I had been unnoticed. I remained where I lay for a few minutes, too exhausted to rise, too perplexed to know what to do. But by degrees I recovered energy and framed resolutions, and, rising to my feet that was stiff and numbed, I went to the door, knocked, and remained awaiting a reply. None came. I knocked again, and then, impatient at the delay, unhasped the door uninvited and entered. The spectacle that met my eyes was sufficiently surprising to make me doubt whether I were awake or dreaming. About the table sat the 3 women, aged, grey and haggard, with long lean fingers, sorting the contents of the saddlebags heaped upon it. But what that was among which their fingers moved, I could not tell. There appeared to be small, flickering lights of various colour and different degrees of brilliancy. Interspersed in the heap were dark particles. "I am sorry to intrude," said I, as the 3 women raised their faces and looked at me. They were strangely alike, all much of an age, equally grey, wan and weird, with their hair hanging over their shoulders. All had their sleeves rolled up above their elbows, the nervous arms so lean that their hands at the extremities looked preternaturally large. "I must apologise," I said. "I sank up to my shoulders in Crowdy Marsh, and I extricated myself with the utmost difficulty, and am so exhausted and so chilled that I am constrained to throw myself on your hospitality and entreat you to allow me to rest so as to warm myself and get somewhat dry before proceeding on my way." "You can come in and rest," said one of the sisters. "Sit by the fire," said the second. "Drink from the simmering cauldron," said the third. Then, without further regarding me, they proceeded with their work. I took them at their word. I drew towards the hearth and crouched over the fire. My teeth chattered with cold. On the hob stood a mug and a ladle. Without more ado, I dipped the long-handled ladle into the pot and poured the liquid it brought up into the mug set that to my lips. The draught was fiery. It sent a glow through my arteries and inflamed my brain. It was excellent in flavour and strength, and I felt that it nerved me and enabled me to resist the chill that had invaded my members and was stealing upon my heart. My garments began to steam. It was not judicious to dry them upon me by the fire, but what else could I do? I felt that I must drive away the numbness, so as to enable me to pursue my course, and the exertion, I trusted, would restore circulation and prevent the ill effects of my immersion in the morass. I now looked at the sisters, for sisters they certainly were. What could have induced these women to settle on the edge of the ill-savoured and unwholesome marsh? No one with common sense, I should have supposed, would have done that, but would have selected a habitation on higher ground, above the mists that hung over Crowdy. Possibly the moor slope was so thickly strewn with granite masses as to leave only a vacant spot for their hovel and little field near the brim of the morass. This alone could explain their settling in such a spot. I puzzled my head to make out on what the sisters were engaged. At one moment I supposed that they were sorting out the crystals that go by the name of Cornish diamonds. At another I conjectured that they were collecting glowworms, but then I considered these insects are not seen in October. Two of the sisters were gathering what they collected into little heaps at their sides on the board. The third had a pan on the floor at her feet, and I noticed that she picked out and raked together only such particles as showed no light, and these she dropped into the pan. As my chill passed off, my interest in what proceeded under my eyes increased. I could restrain my curiosity no longer, and, drawing my stool to the table, asked, "Would you mind informing me what those articles are which you are selecting so carefully?" "Faculties," replied the woman who sat nearest to me. "Gifts," said the second. "Talents," said the third. "I am in no degree enlightened," said I. "Who was the rider who came to your door and surrendered to you his saddlebags?" "Dewar, the great master," answered the first. "He gathers up the neglected, the unused and the misused faculties," explained the second. "In nature nothing is lost," said the third. "Everyone," continued the first, "is given faculties. Such as have been received and by stress of circumstances have not been brought to perfection go into my heap. I select all such faculties as are wilfully neglected," said the second. "They go into my heap. All such as are misused, turned to evil, I cast into the pan," said the third. "Look yonder where they lie, like slugs sodden in salt water." "Mine are for redistribution," said the first. The same with mine, said the second. Mine go into Crowdy Marsh, said the third. She stooped, lifted a trapdoor, and shot the contents of her pan into the hole beneath the floor. That is the sewer discharging into the morass, and they run down into Crowdy, where they rot and stink. Dewar, said the first, rides over the world and collects human faculties from the souls of men and women, faculties implanted in them when they come into the world that have been unused, neglected, or ill-used. In nature there is no waste. We sought them out for redistribution, said the second. Save such as have been ill-used, they go to feed Crowdy, added the third. I was not much the wiser for their explanation. Excuse me, I said. Generalities are beyond my powers of comprehension. Come to particulars and then I get hold of the sense. What, for instance, is that? I pointed to a sparklet that the first was handling. It was luminous with a steady ray. That, said she, is the faculty of the strategist. It was implanted in a man, and had circumstances been propitious, he would have made a great general, a Wellington or a Napoleon. Had he been in Parliament, he would have been in the ministry before long, and have been a marvellous man for organising and holding his party together. But circumstances were unfavourable. He was, to the end of his days, a coal-heaver. He is in no degree blameworthy. He had not the chance. She took up a luminous drop that diffused a soft, sweet radiance. This, she said, is the maternal faculty. It was disposed of to a woman who never had the offer of a man's hand, and died, sorely against her will, as an old maid. She never had the chance. Then I turned to the other sister. Excuse my freedom, said I, if I say to you what I did to your sister. Do not give me generalities, but particular instances. What is that star you hold between your finger and thumb that has in it all the prismatic colours? That, said she, is the artist's faculty. He in whom it was lodged as a child showed marked aptitude with his pencil. He could catch a likeness in a moment, and with him every stroke told. His father, like a reasonable man, saw what was the bent of his son's genius, and directed his education in conformity with his taste for art. He sent him to the Royal Academy. Which killed the artistic faculty in him, I interrupted. No, that was not so. His father died early and left him a competence. He was not rich, but in easy circumstances. He laid aside his brush and palette, and spent his time in golf, cricket, billiards, bridge, and poker. In a word, became a loafer and pleasure-seeker, and did nothing with the talent that was in him, and which he knew was there, but was too lazy to develop. He had the chance, and threw it away. He goes to my heap. And that? Said I, pointing to another drop. It is the modelling faculty, said the second sister. It was bestowed on a woman. What, to make a sculptor of her? No, the moulding of character. She married a very rich man, and had many children, 10 in all. She might have shaped their minds and characters. But she was inert. She left them to nurses and governesses, and became a great society lady, neglecting her domestic duties and the direction of her children's future. She had 10 chances, and threw them all away. This goes into my heap. See, exclaimed the third sister, here is a pile of talents that have been not neglected but misused, that have been dedicated to evil only. This, taking up what looked like a dead slug, this... Stay, I interrupted. Faculties, talents turned to bad ends are manifest enough in the world. I have come across many of them, to my cost. I need no special examples. I have seen too many of them already. Suddenly the sisters cried out, "Throw yourselves down! He comes! He comes! As you value your eyesight, do not look up." I saw the 3 hags cover up their eyes and drop their faces upon the table. I obeyed and cast myself down. Then I heard a rushing sound, and a brilliant light filled the room. So brilliant was it that although my face was covered, it dazzled me through my fingers and eyelids. I could not have looked up. I should have been blinded. In a moment the light was gone. The sound had passed away. I rose and resumed my place at the table. "He has passed through," said one sister. "Who?" I inquired. "The angel of redistribution," answered the first. "See, my pile has gone. His right hand gathered it up." "And his left hand took up mine," said the second. "Of mine he has taken nothing," said the third sister. "All mine goes down the drain into the slough of rottenness." Then the sisters rose to their feet. "The moon has risen," said the first. "It is time, stranger, for you to go." "Keep to the right above the marsh," advised the second. "They have come out in quest of you," said the third. I also had risen. I was no more to remain in the cottage. That was obvious. I made my way to the door, but, standing there, I turned for the purpose of thanking the sisters, but instantly the door was slammed in my face and I was shut out. Presently I heard my name called. I saw lights. Then I was grasped by the hand, and Richards exclaimed, "By the living jingo, I thought never to see you again. How did you manage to escape?" "I escaped in a strange fashion," I replied, "but of that on a future occasion. Hark!" I heard the blast of the horn and the baying of hounds. "Look!" I cried, as I saw the wild hunt sweep over the moonlit side of a tor in a mad career. "I hear nothing and see nothing," said Richards. "You must see. Look yonder, do you not see them?" "See what?" "Dewar and his pack." "I see nothing but the broken shadows of clouds flying over the face of the moon. On my word, friend, immersion in Crowdy Mire seems to have quickened your faculties to see and to hear what are unperceived by other eyes and ears." "It may be so. It must be so," I said meditatively. "I have had strange experiences this night, such as not are given to other men." The end. I really like that one. Not least because the idea of the angel of redistribution is very funny to me. It's like, oh, but it's just, it was charming. It was really charming. It's like, I just love that. I was like, that is an interesting story, and not a version of which I've never come across before. The idea of sort of like the Cornish version of the Fates. Oh yeah, Diana said 3 Fates, but Cornish, yeah. It's like, but they're not like cutting people's lives short or anything. They're not like being fate. They're just like, yeah, these are all the talents and faculties and stuff that people have missed along their lives, and we distribute them accordingly. I just thought that was really charming, and the idea that the marshes are like these wastes of talents used for evil. But just, I'm sorry, the angel of redistribution is just very funny to me. It's just like, oh, okay. Well, it's efficient. Seemed good from what you heard. Yes, hello, Kiwi. Sorry you came in halfway through that. It wasn't a particularly long story, so if you want to catch up, you won't have long to catch up. But yeah, I really enjoyed that one. It was quite charming. And I like the fact that the old ladies just slammed the door in his face at the end. It's like, no, piss off. So yeah, That was fun. But we're going to take an early break because the next story is quite a bit longer. So, yeah, thank you for listening to that. And, oh yes, if Lady Mephistopheles, you are watching the VOD, thank you very much for being here. Hope you are sleeping well. Also, Arian, thank you very much for being here. Go sleep well. But yes, we shall go to a break. So go do break-related things, and we shall see you back in about 5 minutes. Bye for now. are back. Hello, everybody. We are back from the break. I hope we're well. I hope put my teeth in. I hope we've all had a good break. You finally managed to make dinner, small cog. Hooray! I'm glad you managed. Sometimes that is, sometimes it's, as you say, getting up and actually starting the thing is the hard thing. So good job for doing that. Cozy break. Good. Cozy break is best break. All breaks should be cozy. So the next story we've got is definitely. Ooh, you made ginger tea. Oh, now you're sleepy. Nice. I refuse to say EP. But nice. Oh, now I fancy ginger tea. Damn it, Diana. You've forgotten that you even need dinner. That's probably not great. No, would not. Yes, dinner is important. Food is important. We should eat. But yes, we've had one kind of lurk away, Wayward Bard. Thank you very much for the follow and welcome in. We don't think we have a lurk command. We have a lurk emote, I think. Do we still have a lurk emote? There's a lurk. But yes, we've had spectacular. Yes, new word. Spectacular ginger redbush tea. Ooh, that does sound good. Nice. So we've had a kind of like fairly wholesome story, I would say. The last one is. This one is not, but it's fantastic. I read this and I was just like, okay, that is one of the best, like, of this kind of genre of sort of horror, ghosty horror things, story-wise. Yeah, it's brilliant. Really, really enjoyed this. So, I guess if we are all teed up, cozy, all of all of the above, can speak words, that also helps. I have again put the text in chat. It might not have gone down to the specific point at the page that this particular story is at, but I think it's like page 93 or something. Is the only one I could find. Vibes aligned. Marvellous. Good. Well, if we're all sitting comfortably, we shall continue with our second and last story for tonight, after my stomach shuts up, which is Curious Adventure of Mr. Bond by Nugent Barker. Mr. Bond climbed from the wooded slopes of the valley into broad moonlight. His Inverness cape, throwing his portly figure into still greater prominence against the floor of treetops at his back, was torn and soiled by twigs and thorns and leaves, and he stooped with prim concern to brush off the bits and pieces. After this, he eased his knapsack on his shoulder, and now he blinked his eyes upon the country stretching out before him. Far away, across the tufted surface of the tableland, there stood a house, with its column of smoke lighted and still on the verge of a forest. A house, an inn! He felt it in his very bones. His hunger returned, and became a source of gratification to him. Toiling on, and pulling the brim of his hat over his eyes, he watched the ruby gleam grow bigger and brighter, and when at last he stood beneath the sign, he cried aloud, scarcely able to believe in his good fortune. "The Rest of the Traveller," he read, and there too ran the name of the landlord, Crispin Sassenach. The stillness of the night discouraged him, and he was afraid to tap at the curtained window. And now, for the first time, the full weight of his weariness fell upon the traveller. Staring into the black mouth of the porch, he imagined himself to be at rest, in bed, sprawled out, abundantly sleeping, drugged into forgetfulness by a full stomach. He shut his eyes and drooped a little under his Inverness cape, but when he looked again into the entrance, there stood Crispin Sassenach, holding a lamp between their faces. Mr. Bond's was plump and heavy-jawed, with sagging cheeks and eyes that scarcely reflected the lamplight. The other face was smooth and large and oval, with small lips pressed into a smile. "Come in," the landlord whispered. "Do come in. She is cooking a lovely broth tonight." He turned and chuckled, holding the lamp above his head. Through the doorway of this lost upland inn, Mr. Bond followed the monstrous back of his host. The passage widened and became a hall, and here, amongst the shadows that were gliding from their lurking places as the lamp advanced, the landlord stopped and tilted the flat of his hand in the air, as though enjoining his guest to listen. Then Mr. Bond disturbed the silence of the house with a sniff and a sigh. Not only could he smell the lovely broth, already in this outer hall he tasted it, a complex and subtle flavour, pungent, heavy as honey, light as a web in the air, nipping him in the stomach, bringing tears into his eyes. Mr. Bond stared at Crispin Sassenach at the shadows beyond, and back again to Crispin Sassenach. The man was standing there, with his huge, oval, hairless face upturned in the light of the lamp he carried, and then, impulsively, as though reluctant to cut short such sweet anticipation, he plucked the traveller by the cape and led him to the cheerful living-room, and introduced him, with a flourish of the hand, to Myrtle Sassenach, the landlord's young and small and busy wife, who at that very moment was standing at a round table of great size, beneath the massive centre-beam of the ceiling, her black hair gleaming in the light of many candles, her plump hand dipping a ladle soundlessly into a bowl of steam. On seeing the woman, whose long lashes were once more directed towards the bowl, Mr. Bond drew his chin primly into his neckcloth, and glanced from her to Crispin Sassenach, and finally he fixed his eyes on the revolutions of the ladle. In a moment, purpose fell upon the living-room, and with swift and nervous gestures the landlord seated his guest at the table, seized the ladle from his wife, plunged it into the bowl, and thrust the brimming plate into the hands of Myrtle, who began at once to walk towards the traveller, the steam of the broth rising into her grave eyes. After a muttered grace, Mr. Bond pushed out his lips as though he were whispering "spoon." "Oh, what a lovely broth!" he murmured, catching a drip in his handkerchief. Crispin Sassenach grinned with delight. "I always say it is the best in the world." Whereupon, with a rush, he broke into peals of falsetto laughter and blew a kiss towards his wife. A moment later, the two Sassenachs were leaving their guest to himself, bending over their own platefuls of broth and discussing domestic affairs as though they had no other person sitting at their table. For some time their voices were scarcely louder than the sound of the broth-eating, but when the traveller's plate was empty, then, in a flash, Crispin Sassenach became again a loud and attentive host. "Now then, sir, another helping?" he suggested, picking up the ladle and beaming down into the bowl, while Myrtle left her chair and walked a second time towards the guest. Mr. Bond said that he would, and pulled his chair a little closer to the table. Into his blood and bones life had returned with twice its accustomed vigour. His very feet were as light as though he had soaked them in a path of pine needles. "There you are, sir. Myrtle's coming. Lord Almighty, how I wish I was tasting it for the first time." Then, spreading his elbows, the landlord crouched over his own steaming plateful, and chuckled again. "This broth is a wine in itself. It's a wine in itself, by God! It staggers a man." Flushed with excitement, his oval face looked larger than ever, and his auburn hair, whirled into bellicose corkscrews, seemed to burn brighter, as though someone had brought the bellows to it. Stirred by the broth, Mr. Bond began to describe minutely his journey out of the valley. His voice grew as prosy, his words as involved as though he were talking at home amongst his own people. "Now, let me see, where was I?" he buzzed again and again. And later, "I was very glad to see your light, I can tell you," he chuckled. Then Crispin jumped up from the table, his small mouth pouting with laughter. The evening shifted to the fireside. Fresh logs cracked like pistol shots as Crispin Sassenach dropped them into the flames. The traveller would wish for nothing better than to sit here by the hearth, talking plangently to Crispin and slyly watching Myrtle as she cleared away the supper things, though, indeed, among his own people, Mr. Bond was thought to hold women in low esteem. He found her downcast eyes modest and even pretty. One by one she blew the candles out. With each extinguishment she grew more ethereal, while reaping a fuller share of the pagan firelight. "Come and sit beside us now and talk," thought Mr. Bond, and presently she came. They made him very comfortable. He found a log fire burning in his bedroom and a bowl of broth on the bedside table. "Oh, but they're overdoing it!" he cried aloud, petulantly. "They're crude, they're nothing but schoolchildren." And seizing the bowl, he emptied it onto the shaggy patch of garden beneath his window. The black wall of the forest seemed to stand within a few feet of his eyes. The room was filled with the mingled light of moon, fire, and candle. Mr. Bond, eager at last for the dreamless rest, the abandoned sleep of the traveller, turned and surveyed the room in which he was to spend the night. He saw with pleasure the four-poster bed, itself as large as a tiny room, the heavy oaken chairs and cupboards, the tall twisting candlesticks, their candles burnt halfway, no doubt, by a previous guest, the ceiling that he could touch with the flat of his hand. He touched it. In the misty morning he could see no hint of the forest, and down the shallow staircase he found the hall thick with the odour of broth. The Sassenachs were seated already at the breakfast table, like two children, eager to begin the day with their favourite food. Crispin Sassenach was lifting his spoon and pouting his lips, while Myrtle was stirring her ladle round the tureen, her eyes downcast. And Mr. Bond sighed inaudibly as he saw again the woman's dark and lustrous hair. He noticed also the flawless condition of the Sassenach's skin. There was not a blemish to be seen on their two faces or their 4 hands. He attributed this perfection to the beneficial qualities of the broth, no less than to the upland air, and he began to discuss, in his plangent voice, the subject of health in general. In the middle of this discourse, Crispin Sassenach remarked, excitedly, that he had a brother who kept an inn a day's journey along the edge of the forest. "Oh," said Mr. Bond, pricking up his ears. "So you have a brother, have you?" "Certainly," whispered the innkeeper. "Certainly," whispered the innkeeper. "It is most convenient." "Most convenient for what?" "Why, for the inns. His name's Martin. We share our guests. We help each other. The proper brotherly spirit, by God." Mr. Bond stared angrily into his broth. They share their guests? But what, he thought, has that to do with me? He said aloud, "Perhaps I'll meet him one day, Mr. Sassenach." "Today!" cried Crispin, whacking his spoon onto the table. "I'm taking you there today. But don't you worry," he added, seeing the look on the other's face, and flattering himself that he had read it all right. "You'll be coming back to us. Don't you worry. Day after tomorrow, day after that, one of these days. Ain't that right, Mir? Ain't that right?" he repeated, bouncing up and down in his chair like a big child. "Quite right," answered Myrtle Sassenach to Mr. Bond, whose eyes were fixed upon her with heavy attention. A moment later the innkeeper was out of his chair, making for the hall, calling back to Myrtle to have his boots ready. In the midst of this bustle, Mr. Bond bowed stiffly to Myrtle Sassenach and found his way with dignity to the back garden, that now appeared wilder than he had supposed, a fenced-in plot of grass reaching above his knees and scattered with burdock, whose prickly heads clung to his clothes as he made for the gate in the fence at the foot of this wilderness. He blinked his eyes and walked on the rough turf that lay between him and the forest. By this time the sun was shining in an unclouded sky, a fine day was at hand, and Mr. Bond was sweeping his eye along the endless wall of forest when he heard the innkeeper's voice calling to him in the stillness. "Mr. Bond! Mr. Bond!" Turning reluctantly and stepping carefully through the garden in order to avoid the burrs of the burdock, the traveller found Crispin Sassenach on the point of departure, in a great bustle, with a strong horse harnessed to a two-wheeled cart, and his wife putting up her face to be kissed. "Yes, I'll go with you," cried Mr. Bond, but the Sassenachs did not appear to hear him. He lingered for a moment in the porch, scowling at Myrtle's back, scowling at the large young horse that seemed to toss its head at him with almost human insolence. Then he sighed, and, slinging his knapsack over his shoulder, sat himself beside the driver. The horse was uncommonly large, restless between the shafts, and in perfect fettle, and without a word from Crispin, the animal began to plunge forward rapidly over the worn track. For some time the two men drove in silence, on the second stage of Mr. Bond's adventure above the valley. The traveller sat up stiffly, inflating his lungs methodically, glaring through his small eyes and forcing back his shoulders. Presently he began to talk about the mountain air, and received no answer. On his right hand the wall of the forest extended as far as his eyes could see, while on his left hand ran the brink of the valley, a mile away, broken here and there by rowan trees. The monotony of the landscape and the continued silence of the innkeeper soon began to pall on Mr. Bond, who liked talking and was seldom at ease unless his eyes were busy picking out new things. Even the horse behaved with the soundless regularity of a machine, so that, besides the traveller, only the sky showed a struggle to make progress. Clouds came from nowhere, shaped and broke, and at midday the sun in full swing was riding between white puffs of cloud, glistening by fits and starts on the moist coat of the horse. The forest beneath and the stretch of coarse grass running to the valley were constantly shining and darkening, yet Crispin Sassenach never opened his mouth, even to whisper, though sometimes between his teeth he spat soundlessly over the edge of the cart. The landlord had brought with him a casserole of the broth, and during one of these sunny breaks he pulled up the horse, without a word, and poured the liquor into 2 pannikins, which he proceeded to heat patiently over a spirit stove. In the failing light of the afternoon, when the horse was still making his top speed, when Crispin Sassenach was buzzing fitfully between his teeth, and sleep was flirting with the traveller, a shape appeared obscurely on the track ahead, and with it came the growing jingle of bells. Mr. Bond sat up and stared. He had not expected to meet in such a god-forsaken spot another cart or carriage. He saw at length approaching him a 4-wheeled buggy, drawn by 2 sprightly horses in tandem. A thin-faced man in breeches and a bowler hat was driving it. The 2 drivers greeted each other solemnly, raised their whips, but never slackened speed. "Well, who was that?" asked Mr. Bond after a pause. "My brother Martin's manservant." "Where is he going?" asked Mr. Bond. "To the rest of the traveller, with news." "Indeed? What news?" persisted Mr. Bond. The landlord turned his head. "News for my Myrtle," he whispered, winking at the traveller. Mr. Bond shrugged his shoulders. "What is the use of talking to such a bore?" he thought, and fell once more into his doze. The harvest moon climbed up again, whitening the earth, while now and then the landlord spat towards the forest, and never spoke another word until he came to Martin Sassenachs. Then Crispin leapt to life. "Out with you!" he cried. "Psst, Mr. Bond, wake up! Get out at once! We've reached the Headless Man, sir!" Mr. Bond, staggered by so much energy, flopped to the ground. His head felt as large as the moon. He heard the horse panting softly, and saw the breath from its nostrils flickering upwards in the cold air, while the white-faced Crispin Sassenach was leaping about under the moon, whistling between his teeth, and calling out enthusiastically, "Martin! Martin! Here he is!" The sheer wall of forest echoed back the name. Indeed, the whole of the moonlight seemed to be filled with the name Martin, and Mr. Bond had a fierce desire to see this Martin Sassenach, whose sign was hanging high above the traveller's head. After repeated calls from Crispin, the landlord of the Headless Man appeared, and Mr. Bond, expecting a very giant in physical stature, was shocked to see the small and bespectacled figure that had emerged from the house. Crispin Sassenach grew quick and calm in a moment. "Meet again," he whispered to Mr. Bond, shutting his eyes and stretching his small mouth as though in ecstasy. Then he gave the traveller a push towards the approaching Martin, and a moment later he was in his cart, and the horse was springing its way back to the rest of the traveller. Mr. Bond stood where he was, listening to the dying sound of the horse, and watching the landlord of the Headless Man, and presently he was staring at two grey flickering eyes behind the landlord's glasses. "Anyone arriving at my inn from my brother's is trebly welcome. He is welcome not only for Crispin's own sake and mine, but also for the sake of our brother Stephen." The voice was as quiet and clear as the moonlight, and the speaker began to return to his inn with scarcely a pause between speech and movement. Mr. Bond examined curiously the strongly lighted hall that in shape and size was the very double of Crispin's. Oil lamps, gracefully columned, gleamed almost as brightly from their fluted silver surfaces as from their opal-lighted heads, and there was Martin stooping up the very stairs, it seemed, that Mr. Bond had walked at Crispin Sassenach's. A scanty man, this brother, throwing out monstrous shadows, turning once to peer back at his guest, and standing at last in a bright and airy bedroom, where, with courteous words from which his eyes, lost in thought and gently flickering, seemed to be far distant, he invited his guest to wash before dining. Martin Sassenach fed Mr. Bond delicately on that evening of his arrival, presenting him with small, cold dishes of various kinds, and always exquisitely cooked and garnished. And these, together with the almost crystalline cleanliness of the room and of the table, seemed appropriate to the chemist-like appearance of the host. A bottle of wine was opened for Mr. Bond, who, amongst his own people, was known to drink nothing headier than bottled cider. During dinner, the wine warmed up a brief moment of attention in Martin Sassenach. He peered with sudden interest at his guest. "The Headless Man? There is, in fact, a story connected with that name, if you can call it a story." He smiled briefly, tapping his finger, and a moment later was examining an ivory piece, elaborately carved, that held the bill of fare. "Lovely, lovely, isn't it? In fact, there are many stories," he ended, as though the number of stories excused him from wasting his thought over the recital of merely one. Soon after dinner he retired, alluding distantly to work from which he never liked to be away long. Mr. Bond went to bed early that night, suffering from dyspepsia, and glowering at the absence of home comforts in his bright and efficient bedroom. The birds awakened him to a brisk autumnal morning. Breathing heavily, he told himself that he was always very fond of birds and trees and flowers, and soon he was walking sleepily in Martin Sassenach's garden. The trimness of the beds began to please him. He followed the right-angled paths with dignified obesity, His very bones were proud to be alive. A green gate at the garden foot attracted Mr. Bond's attention, but knowing that it would lead him onto the wild grass beyond, and thence to the forest, whose motionless crest could be seen all this while over the privet hedge, he chose to linger where he was, sniffing the clear scent of the flowers, and losing, with every breath and step, another whiff of Crispin's broth, to his intense delight. Hunger drew him back into the house at last, and he began to pace the twilit rooms. Martin Sassenach, he saw, was very fond of ivory. He stooped and peered at the delicate things, ivory objects of every description, perfectly carved, paper knives, chessmen, salad spoons, tiny busts and faces, often of grotesque appearance, and even delicate boxes fretted from ivory. The echo of his feet on the polished floors intensified the silence of the headless man. Yet even this indoor hush was full of sound when compared with the stillness of the scene beyond the uncurtained windows. The tufted grass was not yet lighted by the direct rays of the sun. The traveller stared towards the rowan trees that stood on the brink of the valley. Beyond them stretched a carpet of mist, raising the rest of the world to the height of the plateau, and Mr. Bond, recalling the house and town that he had left behind him, began to wonder whether he was glad or sorry that his adventures had brought him to this lost region. "Cold enough for my cape," he shivered, fetching it from the hall and hurrying out of the inn. The desire had seized him to walk on the tufted grass, to foot it as far as the trees, and he had indeed gone some distance on his journey, wrapped in his thoughts and antique Inverness cape, when the note of a gong came up behind him, like a thread waving on the air. "Hark at that," he whispered, staring hard at the ragged line of rowan trees on which his heart was set. Then he shrugged his shoulders and turned back to the headless man, where his host was standing, lost in thought at the breakfast table that still held the crumbs of the night before. "Ah, yes, it's you. You slept well?" "Tolerably well," said Mr. Bond. "We breakfast rather early here. It makes a longer day. Stennet will be back later. He's gone to my brother Crispin's." "With news?" said Mr. Bond. Martin Sassenach bowed courteously, though a trifle stiffly. He motioned his guest towards a chair at the table. Breakfast was cold and short and silent. Words were delicate things to rear in this crystalline atmosphere. Martin's skin sagged and was the colour of old ivory. Now and then he looked up at his guest, his grey eyes focused beyond mere externals, and it seemed as though they lodged themselves in Mr. Bond's very bones. On one of these occasions the traveller made great play with his appetite. "It's all this upland air," he asserted, thumping his chest. The sun began to rise above the plateau. Again the landlord vanished, murmuring his excuses. Silence flooded the headless man. The garden purred in full blaze of the sun that now stood higher than the forest, and the gravelled paths crunched slowly beneath Mr. Bond's feet. "News for Myrtle," he pondered, letting his thoughts stray back over his journey, and frequently he drifted through the house where all was still and spacious, dusty museum-like rooms brimming with sunlight, while everywhere those ivory carvings caught his eye, possessing his sight as completely as the taste of Crispin's broth had lodged in his very lungs. Lunch was yet another meal of cold food and silence, broken only by coffee that the landlord heated on a spirit stove at the end of the table, and by a question from the traveller, to which this thin-haired Martin, delicately flicking certain greyish dust off the front of his coat and sleeve, replied that he had been a collector of carvings for years past, and was continually adding to his collection. His voice drew out in length, and seemed, in fact, to trail him from the sunlight dining-room back to his everlasting work. and now the afternoon itself began to drag and presently to settle down in the sun as the whole of time were dozing. "Here's my indigestion back again," sighed Mr. Bond, mooning about. At home he would have rested in his bedroom with its pink curtains and flowered wallpaper. He crept into the garden and eyed the back of the house. Which of those windows in the trimly creepered stone lit up the landlord and his work? He listened for the whirring of a lathe, the scraping of a knife, and wondered, startled, why he had expected to hear such things. He felt the forest behind his back, and turned and saw it looming above the privet hedge. Impulsively he started to cross the sun-swept grass beyond the gate, but within a few yards of the forest his courage failed him again. He could not face the wall of trees, and with a cry he fled into the house and seized his Inverness. His eyes looked far beyond the rowans on the skyline as he plodded over the tufted grass. Already he could see himself down there below, counties and counties away, on the valley level, in the house of his neighbours, the Olcards, drinking their coffee or tea and telling them of his adventures, and especially of this adventure. It was not often that a man of his age and secure position in the world went off alone in search of joy or trouble. He scanned the distant line of rowan trees and nodded, harking back. "As far as it has gone, I'll tell them this adventure as far as it ever went." And he would say to them, "The things I might have seen if I had stayed. Yes, Olcard, I was very glad to climb down into the valley that day, I can tell you. I don't mind admitting I was a bit frightened." The tippet of his cape caressed his shoulders, like the hand of a friend. Mr. Bond was not yet halfway to the rowan trees when, looking back, he saw, against the darkness of the forest wall, a carriage rapidly approaching the headless man. At once there flashed into his memory the eyes of the manservant Stennet, who went between the Sassenach inns. He knew that Stennet's eyes were on him now. The sound of the horse's feet was coming up to him like a soft ball bouncing over the grass. Mr. Bond shrugged his shoulders and stroked his pendulous cheeks. Already he was on his way back to the headless man, conscious that 2 flying horses could have overtaken him long before he had reached the rowans. "But why," he thought, holding himself with dignity, "should I imagine that these people are expecting me to run away? And why that sudden panic in the garden? It's all that deathly quietness of the morning getting on my nerves." The carriage had disappeared some time before he reached the inn, over whose tiled and weather-stained roof the redness of the evening was beginning to settle. And now the traveller was conscious of a welcome that seemed to run out and meet him at the very door. He found a log fire crackling in the dining room, and Mr. Bond, holding his hands to the blaze, felt suddenly at ease and weary. He had intended to assert himself, to shout for Martin Sassenach, to demand that he be escorted down at once from the plateau. But now he wished for nothing better than to stand in front of the fire, waiting for Stennet to bring him tea. A man began to sing in the heart of the house. Stennet? The fellow's eyes and hawk-like nose were suddenly visible in the fire. The singing voice grew louder, died at length discreetly into silence and the tread of footsteps in the hall, and again the traveller was listening to the flames as they roared in the chimney. "Let me take your coat, sir," Stennet said. Then Mr. Bond whipped round, his cheeks shaking with anger. Why did they want to force this hospitality upon him, making him feel like a prisoner? He glared at the large checked riding breeches, at the muscular shoulders, at the face that seemed to have grown the sharper through swift driving. He almost shouted, "Where's that bowler hat?" Fear? Perhaps, but if fear had clutched him for a moment, it had left him now. He knew that the voice had pleased him, a voice of deference breaking into the cold and irreverent silence of the headless man. The cape was already off his shoulders, hanging on Stennet's bent and respectful arm. And, God be praised, the voice was announcing that tea would be ready soon. Mr. Bond's spirits leapt with the word. He and Stennet stood there, confidentially plotting. "China, sir?" "Yes, sir, we have china," Stennet said. "And buttered toast," said Mr. Bond, softly rubbing his chin. Some time after tea he was awakened from his doze by the hand of the manservant, who told him that a can of boiling water was waiting in his room. Mr. Bond felt that dinner would be a rich meal that night, and it was. He blushed as the dishes were put before him. Hare soup! How did they know his favourite soup? Through entree, remove and toast, his hands, soft and pink from washing, were busier than they had been for days. The chicken was braised to a turn. Oh, what mushrooms au gratin! The partridge brought tears to his eyes. The Saxony pudding caused him to turn again to Martin in Stennet's praise. The landlord bowed with distant courtesy. "A game of chess?" he suggested when dinner was over. "My last opponent was a man like yourself, a traveller making a tour of the inns. We started a game. He is gone from us now. Perhaps you will take his place," smiled Martin Sassenach, his precise voice dropping and seeming to transmit its flow of action to the thin hand poised above the board. "My move," he whispered, playing at once. He had thought it out for a week. But although Mr. Bond tried to sink his thoughts into the problem before him, he could not take them off his after-dinner dyspepsia, and with apologies and groans he scraped back his chair. "I'm sorry for that," smiled Martin, and his eyes flickered over the board. "I'm very sorry. Another night, undoubtedly, with your kind help. Another night." The prospect of another day at the Headless Man was at once disturbing and pleasant to Mr. Bond as he went wheezing up to bed. "Ah, Stennet, do you ever suffer from dyspepsia?" he asked mournfully, seeing the man at the head of the staircase. Stennet snapped his fingers and was off downstairs in a moment, and a minute later he was standing at the traveller's door with a bowl of Crispin's famous broth. "Oh, that!" cried Mr. Bond, staring down at the bowl. Then he remembered its fine effect on his indigestion at Crispin's, and when at last he pulled the sheets over his head, he fell asleep in comfort and did not wake until the morning. At breakfast, Martin Sassenach looked up from his plate. "This afternoon," he murmured, "Stennet will be driving you to my brother Stephen's." Mr. Bond opened his eyes. "Another inn? Another of you Sassenachs?" "Crispin, Martin, Stephen. Just the three of us. A perfect number, if you come to think of it." The traveller strode into the garden. Asters glowed in the lustreless light of the morning. By 10 o'clock the sun was shining again, and by midday a summer heat lay on the plateau, penetrating even into Mr. Bond's room. The silence of the forest pulled him to the window, made him lift up his head and shut his eyes upon that monstrous mass of trees. Fear was trying to overpower him. He did not want to go to Stephen Sassenach's, but the hours were running past him quickly now. The stillness was gone from the inn. At lunch, to which his host contributed a flow of gentle talk, the traveller felt rising within him an impatience to be off on the third stage of his journey, if such a stage must be. He jumped up from his chair without apology and strode into the garden. The asters were now shining dimly in the strong sunlight. He opened the gate in the privet hedge and walked onto the tufted grass that lay between it and the forest. As he did so, he heard the flap of a wing behind him and saw a pigeon flying from a window in the roof. The bird flew over his head and over the forest and out of sight. And for the first time he remembered seeing a pigeon taking a similar course when he was standing in the garden at Crispin's inn. His thoughts were still following the pigeon over the boundless floor of treetops when he heard a voice calling to him in the silence. "Mr. Bond? Mr. Bond?" He walked at once to the gate and down the garden and into the house, put on his Inverness and hitched his knapsack onto his shoulder, and in a short while he was perched beside Stennet in the flying buggy, staring at the ears of the two horses, and remembering that Martin, at the last moment, instead of bidding his guest goodbye, had gone back to his work. Though he never lost his fear of Stennet, Mr. Bond found Martin's man a good companion on a journey, always ready to speak when spoken to, and even able to arouse the traveller's curiosity at times in the monotonous landscape. "See those rowans over there?" said Stennet, nodding to the left. "Those rowans belong to Mr. Martin. He owns them halfway to Mr. Crispin's place and halfway to Mr. Stephen's, and so it is with Mr. Crispin and Mr. Stephen in their turn." "And what about the forest?" "Same again," said Stennet, waving his hand toward the right. "It's round, you know, and they each own a third, like a huge slice of cake." He clicked his tongue, and the horses pricked up their ears, though on either side of the dashboard the performance was no more a formality, so swiftly was the buggy moving. "Very much quicker than Crispin's cart," gasped the passenger, feeling the wind against his face. Yet, when the evening of the autumn day was closing in, he looked about him with surprise. He saw the moon rise up the valley. Later still, he asked for information regarding the names of the 3 inns, and Stennet laughed. "The gentlemen are mighty proud of them, I can tell you. Romantic and a bit fearsome, that's what I call them. Poetical, too. They don't say the Traveller's Rest, but the rest of the traveller, mind you. That's poetical. I don't think it was Mr. Crispin's idea. I think it was Mr. Martin's or Mrs. Crispin's. They're the clever ones. The headless man is merely grim. A grim turn of mind Mr. Martin has, and it means no more than it says. A man without a head. And then again," continued Stennet, whistling to his horses whose backs were gleaming in the moonlight, "the inn you're going to now, the Traveller's Head, well, inns are called the King's Head sometimes, aren't they, in the King's honour? Mr. Stephen goes one better than that. He dedicates his inn to the traveller himself." By this time a spark of light had become visible in the distance, and Mr. Bond fixed his eyes upon it. Once, for a moment, the spark went out, and he imagined that Stephen's head had passed in front of the living-room lamp. At this picture, anger seized him, and he wondered, amazed, why he was submitting so tamely to the commands, he could call them no less, of these oddly hospitable brothers. Fanned by his rage, the spark grew steadily bigger and brighter, until at last it had achieved the shape and size of a glowing window through which a man's face was grinning into the moonshine. "Look here, what's all this?" cried Mr. Bond, sliding to his feet. "The Traveller's Head, sir," answered Stennet, pointing aloft. They both stared up at the sign above their heads. Then Mr. Bond scanned the sprawling mass of the inn and scowled at its surroundings. The night was still vibrant, without sound. The endless forest stood like a wall of blue-white dust, and the traveller was about to raise his voice in wrath against the brothers Sassenach, when a commotion burst from the porch of the inn, and onto the moon-drenched grass strode a tall and ungainly figure, swinging its arms, with a pack of creatures flopping and stumbling at its heels. "Here is Mr. Stephen," Stennet whispered, watching the approach. The landlord of the Traveller's Head was smiling pleasantly, baring his intensely white teeth, and when he had reached the traveller he touched his forehead with a gesture that was at once respectful and overbearing. "Mr. Bond, sir?" Mr. Bond muttered and bowed, and stared down at the landlord's children, large-headed, large-bellied, primitive creatures flopping round their father and pulling the skirts of the Inverness cape. Father and children gathered round the traveller, who, lost within this little crowd, soon found himself at the entrance of the Traveller's Head, through which his new host urged him by the arm, while two of the children pushed between them and ran ahead clumsily into the depths of the hall. The place was ill-lighted and ill-ventilated, and although Mr. Bond knew from experience exactly where the living-room would be situated, yet, after he had passed through its doorway, he found no further resemblance to those rooms in which he had spent 2 stages of a curious adventure. The oil lamp, standing in the middle of the round centre table, was without a shade. A moth was plunging audibly at the blackened chimney, hurling swift shadows everywhere over the ceiling and figured wallpaper, while, with the return of the children, a harmonium had started fitfully to grunt and blow. "Let me take your cloak, your cape, Mr. Bond, sir," the landlord said, and spread it with surprising care on one of the vast sofas that looked the larger because of their broken springs and the stuffing that protruded through their soiled covers. But at once the children seized upon the cape and would have torn it to pieces had not Mr. Bond snatched it from them. At this they cowered away from the stranger, fixing him with their eyes. Amidst this congestion of people and furniture, Stephen Sassenach smiled and moved continuously, a stooping giant whom none but Mr. Bond obeyed. Here was the type of man whose appearance the traveller likened to that of the old-time executioner, the axeman of the Middle Ages, harsh, loyal, simple, excessively domesticated, with a bulging forehead and untidy eyebrows, and arms muscled, ready for deeds. Stephen kept no order in his house. Noise was everywhere, yet little seemed to be done. The children called their father Steve, and put out their tongues at him. They themselves were unlovely things, and their inner natures seemed to ooze through their skins and form a surface from which the traveller recoiled. 3 of their names were familiar to Mr. Bond. Here were Crispin and Martin and Stephen over again, while Dorcas and Lydia were sisters whose only virtue was their mutual devotion. The food at the Traveller's Head was homely and palatable, and Stephen, the father, cooked it and served it liberally on chipped plates. He sat in his soiled blue shirt, his knotted arms looking richly sunburnt against the blue. He was never inarticulate, and this surprised Mr. Bond. On the contrary, he spoke rapidly and almost as if to himself, in a low, rugged voice that was always a pleasure to hear. At moments he dropped into silence, his eyes shut, his eyebrows lowered, and his bulging forehead grew still more shiny with thought. On such occasions, Dorcas and Lydia would steal to the harmonium, while, backed by a wail from the instrument, Crispin the younger and Martin the younger would jump from the sofas onto the floor. Rousing himself at last, Stephen the elder thumped his fist on the table and turned in his chair to shout at the children, "Get along with you, you devils! Get out your board and practice, you little devils!" Whereupon the children erected a huge board, punctured with holes, and each child began to hurl wooden balls through the holes and into the pockets behind them with astonishing accuracy, except for Dorcas and Lydia. And presently their father reminded them, "The moon is shining!" And once the children scuttled out of the room, and Mr. Bond never saw them again. The noise and the figured wallpaper and the fat moth beating itself against the only source of light had caused the traveller's head to grow heavy with sleep, and it now grew heavier still as he sat by the fire with Stephen after supper was over, listening to the talk of the strangely attractive man in the soiled blue shirt. "You fond of chicken, Mr. Bond, sir?" Mr. Bond nodded. "Children and animals," he muttered drowsily. One has to let them have their way," sighed Stephen Sassenach. The rugged voice came clearly and soothingly into Mr. Bond's ears, until at last it shot up vigorously and ordered the guest to bed. Mr. Bond pulled himself out of his chair and smiled and said good night, and the moth flew into his face. Where were the children, he wondered, Their voices could not be heard. Perhaps they had fallen asleep, suddenly, like animals. But Mr. Bond found it difficult to imagine those eyes in bed, asleep. Lying, some minutes later, in his own massive bed in this third of the Saserac inns, with an extinguished candle on his bedside table, and gazing towards the open window from which he had drawn apart one of the heavy embroidered curtains, Mr. Bond fancied that he could hear faint cries of triumph and sounds of knocking coming from the direction of the forest. Starting up into complete wakefulness, he went to the window and stared at the forest beyond the tufted grass. The sounds, he fancied, putting his hand to his ear, were as those given forth by the children during their game, but louder, as though the game were bigger. Perhaps strange animals were uttering them. Whatever their origin, they were coming from the depth of trees whose stillness was deepened by the light of the moon. "Oh, God," thought Mr. Bond, "I'm sick to death of the moonlight." And with a sweep of the arm he closed the curtains, yet could not shut out the sounds of the forest, nor the sight of the frosted grass beneath the moon. Together, sound and sight filled him with foreboding, and his cheeks shook as he groped for the unlighted candle. He must fetch his Inverness from below, fetch it at once, and get away while there was time. He found his host still sitting by the lamp in the living room. Stephen's fist, lying on the table, was closed. He opened it, and out flew the moth. "He thinks he has got away," cried Stephen, looking up and baring his teeth in a smile. "But he hasn't. He never will." I've come for my Inverness," said Mr. Bond. It was lying on one of the massive sofas. The fire was out, and the air chilly, and the depth of the room lay in darkness. An idea crossed the mind of Mr. Bond. He said, lifting up the cape, "I thought I'd like it on my bed," and he shivered to show how cold he was. Cold he was. From one of the folds the moth flew out, and whirled around the room like a mad thing. "That's all right, Mr. Bond, sir, that's all right." The man had fallen into a mood of abstraction. His forehead shone in the rays of the lamp, and the traveller left the room, holding himself with dignity in his gay dressing-gown, the Inverness hanging on his arm. He was about to climb the staircase when a voice spoke softly in his ear, and wished him good night. Stennet? What was the man doing here? Mr. Bond lifted his candle and gazed in astonishment at the back of Martin's manservant. The figure passed into the shadows, and the soft and deliberate ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall deepened the silence and fear of the moments that followed. Mr. Bond ran to his room, locked himself in, and began to dress. His dyspepsia had seized him again. If only he were back at Crispin's! He parted the curtains and peeped at the night. The shadow of the inn lay on the yard and the tufted grass beyond, and one of the chimneys, immensely distorted, extended as far as the forest. The forest wall itself was solid with moonlight. From behind it there came no longer the sounds of the knocking, and the silence set Mr. Bond trembling again. "I shall escape at dawn," he whispered, "when the moon's gone down." Feeling no longer sleepy, he took from his knapsack a volume of Mungo Park, and, fully dressed, settled himself in an easy-chair, with the curtains drawn again across the window, and the candle burning close behind him. At intervals he looked up from his book, frowning, running his eye over the group of 3 pagodas, in pale red, endlessly repeated on the wallpaper. The restful picture made him drowsy, and presently he slept and snored, and the candle burnt on. At midnight he was awakened by crashing blows on his door. The very candle seemed to be jumping with fear, and Mr. Bond sprang up in alarm. Yes? Who's that?" "What in the name of God is that?" he whispered as the blows grew louder. "What are they up to now?" he asked with rising terror. A splinter flew into the room, and he knew in a flash that the end of his journey had come. Was it Stephen or Stennet? Stephen or Stennet behind the door? The candle flickered as he blundered to and fro. He had no time to think, no time to act. He stood and watched the corner of the axe blade working in the crack in the panel. "Save me, save me," he whispered, wringing his hands. They fluttered towards his Inverness and struggled to push themselves into the obstinate sleeves. "Oh, come on," he whispered, jerking his arms about, anger rising with terror. The whole room shuddered beneath the axe. He plunged at the candle and blew it out. In the darkness, a ray of light shone through a crack in the door and fell on the window curtain. Mr. Bond remembered the creeper clinging beneath his window, and as soon as possible he was floundering, scrambling, slipping down to the house-shadowed garden below. Puffing out his cheeks, he hurried onward, while the thuds of the axe grew fainter in his ears. Brickbats lay in his path. A zinc tub wrenched at his cape and ripped it loudly. An iron hoop caught in his foot, and he tottered forward with outstretched hands. And now, still running in the far-flung shadow of the house, he was on the tufted grass, whimpering a little, struggling against desire to look back over his shoulder, making for the forest that lay in the full beams of the moonlight. He tried to think, and could think of nothing but the size and safety of the shadow on which he was running. He reached the roof of the inn at last, plunged aside from his course of flight, and now he was running up the monstrous shadow of the chimney, thinking of nothing at all because the forest stood so near. Blindingly, a moon-filled avenue stretched before him. The chimney entered the chasm and stopped, and it was as though Mr. Bond were a puff of smoke blowing into the forest depths. His shadow, swinging its monstrously distorted garments, led him to an open space at the end of the avenue. The thick-set trees encircled it with silence deeper than any Mr. Bond had known. Here, in this glade, hung silence within a silence. Yet, halting abruptly and pressing the flat of his hands to his ribs in the pain of his sudden burst of breathing, Mr. Bond had no ears for the silence, nor eyes for anything beyond the scene that faced him in the centre of the forest glade. A group of upright posts, or stakes, set in a concave semicircle, throwing long shadows, and bearing on each summit a human's skull. "The traveller's head, the headless man," he whispered, stricken with terror, whipping his back on the skulls. And there was Stephen Sassenach in silhouette, leaping up the avenue, brandishing his axe as though he were a demented woodcutter coming to cut down trees. The traveller's mind continued to run swiftly through the names of the 3 inns. The traveller's head, he thought, the headless man, the rest of the traveller. He remembered the carrier pigeons that had flown ahead of him from inn to inn. He remembered the dust on the front of Martin's coat. He was staring at the figure in the soiled blue shirt. It had halted now, as still as a tree on the verge of the moon-filled glade, but the whirling thoughts of Mr. Bond were on the verge of light more blinding than this. They stopped, appalled, and the traveller fled beyond the skulls, fruitlessly searching for covert in the farthest wall of trees. Then Stephen sprang in his wake, flinging up a cry that went knocking against the tree trunks. The echoes were echoed by Mr. Bond, who, whipping round to face his enemy, was wriggling and jerking in his Inverness cape, slipping it off at last, and swinging it in his hands, for his blood was up. And now he was deep in mortal combat, wielding his Inverness as the gladiators used to wield their nets in the old arenas. Time and again the axe and the cape engaged each other, the one warding and hindering, the other catching and ripping, clumsily enough, as though in sport. Around the skulls the 2 men fought and panted, now in darkness, now in the full light pouring down the avenue. Their moon-cast shadows fought another fight together, wilder still than theirs. Then Stephen cried, "Enough of this!" and bared his teeth for the first time since the strife had started. "But But you're my friend," bleated Mr. Bond, and he stared at the shining thread of the axe. "The best you ever had, Mr. Bond, sir," answered Stephen Sassenach, and, stepping back, the landlord of the Traveller's Head cut off the Traveller's head. The thump of the head on the sticks and leaves and grass of the forest glade was the first sound in the new and peaceful life of Mr. Bond, and he did not hear it. But to the brothers Sassenach it was a promise of life itself, a signal that all was ready now for them to apply their respective talents busily and happily in the immediate future. Stephen took the head of Mr. Bond, and with gentle though rather clumsy fingers pared it to a skull, grinning back at it with simple satisfaction when the deed was over, and after that he set it up as a fine mark for his brood of primitives, the game's endeavour being to see who could throw the ball into the eye sockets, and to his brother Martin, landlord of the Headless Man, he sent the Headless Man, under the care of Stennet. And Martin, on a soft autumnal day, reduced the headless body to a skeleton, with all its troubles gone, and through the days and nights he sat at work, with swift precision in his fingers, carving and turning, powdering his coat with dust, creating his figures and trinkets, his paper knives and salad spoons and fretted boxes and rare chessmen. And to his brother Crispin, landlord of the rest of the Traveller, Martin sent the rest of the Traveller, the soft and yielding parts, the scraps, the odds and ends, the miscellaneous pieces, all the internal lumber that had gone to fill the skin of the man from the Midlands, and to help to render him in middle years a prey to dyspepsia. Crispin received the parcel with a pursing of his small mouth, and a call to Myrtle in his clear falsetto, "Stennet's here." She answered from the kitchen, "Thank you, Chris." Her hands were soft and swollen as she scoured the tureen. The back of the inn was full of reflected sunlight, and her dark hair shone. "It's too late in the season now," she said when tea time came. "I don't suppose we'll have another one before the spring." Yet she was wrong. That very evening, when the moon had risen from beyond the valley, Myrtle murmured, "There he comes," and continued to stir her ladle in the bowl. Her husband strolled into the hall and wound the clock. He took the lamp from its bracket on the wall. He went to the door and flung it open to the moonlight, holding the lamp above his head. Come in," he said to the stranger standing there. "She is cooking a lovely broth tonight." The end. Thank you for listening. Yep, you all called it. Delicious guess, the broth is indeed people. I love that story. It's dark as hell, but the rest of the Traveller, absolute genius. Genius. I was reading it and I was thinking, okay, he's going to get his head cut off. That's obviously telegraphed by the Headless Man and the head of the Traveller's head. But I hadn't put it together that the rest of the Traveller is the rest of the Traveller. I was like, oh, that's genius. That's so good. Just, mwah, chef's kiss. Such a well put together story. Also, some of the writing in this, where was it? He followed the right-angled paths with dignified obesity. I kind of love that as a phrase. What was the other one? Oh yes, after a muttered grace, Mr. Bond pushed out his lips as though he were whispering spoon. And I did that, and I'm like, oh yeah, that is exactly the face that you make when you're sipping soup. Without the p of spoon, obviously, but that I was just like, this the level of observation of what people do, and yeah, just very good writing. I really, really enjoy some of the sentences in that. And in my opinion, one of the best hung together, this is going to sound awful, but we've read a few of them now, one of the best cannibalism stories that we've read. Really good. Really, really good. Very much enjoyed. And poor Mr. Bond. Oh yes, and like, what was the other good one I liked? Well, just all of the landlord of the Traveller's Head cut off the Traveller's head. Landlord of the rest of the Traveller, Martin sent the rest of the Traveller. It's just like, oh, you're having far too much fun with how smug you are at these names. But the one I liked was also the thump of the head on the sticks and leaves of grass of the forest glades was the first sound in the new and peaceful life of Mr. Bond, and he did not hear it. It's like, yep, nice, also very good. So, yeah, I really like that story. Yep. But just, public service announcement, don't kill people, don't eat people. Not a good idea. I don't think I'll raid over tonight because I'm kind of tired and my voice feels like it's been sandpapered. It was very funny for how creepy it was. I know. It felt very... I'm gonna have to read more of his stuff. Because, yeah, like, don't turn their bones into household objects either. Yep. Again, like the little, like, oh, my last opponent didn't finish his chess game with me. And at the beginning it's just like, oh, you'll come back to us at some point. It's like, oh, very good. Excellent. 10 out of 10. Just, it all very hangs together immaculately. Very, very happy with that story. So yeah, I will not be here next week. For, as I say, I'm in a European country of some description. But hopefully Sam might be back on Saturday. He thinks he might have a cold, so we shall see how his voice fares, but possibly Saturday. But thank you all very much for being here. I hope you enjoyed your weekly dose of spooky stories, and by the next time you see me or hear me, it'll be spooky season. Dun dun dun. But yes, thank you all very much indeed for being here. Go take care of yourselves, and we shall see you here again soon. Thank you, and good night.